Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiance, watching the stars pass by through the main viewing screen. Her ship was one of 50 human vessels patrolling the outer edge of Council space. They had been doing this job for 20 years now, protecting worlds that belonged to alien species she barely understood. The Galactic Coordination Council was supposed to be a peaceful alliance. 200 different alien races working together for the good of everyone. When Earth first made contact with them 50 years ago, it seemed like a dream come true. Humans were no longer alone in the universe, but Sarah had learned that dreams could quickly become nightmares. "Admiral, we're getting a priority message from Council Command," her communications officer reported. Lieutenant Rodriguez was young, barely 25, but he was good at his job. Like most humans in the fleet, he had grown up hearing stories about how lucky Earth was to be part of something bigger. "Put it through," Sarah said. She walked to her command chair, a simple seat that had seen too many battles. Her uniform was clean but worn. After 2 decades of service, she knew that appearance mattered less than results. The holographic display activated, showing the image of Supreme Commander Zarthek, a tall reptilian creature with golden scales and cold yellow eyes. The Zakaran species had been one of the first to welcome humanity into the Council. They had also been the most insistent that humans serve on the front lines. "Admiral Chen." Zarthek's voice was smooth but always carried an undertone that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I trust your patrol sector remains secure?" "Yes, Supreme Commander. No hostile contacts in the past 72 hours. Sarah kept her voice neutral. She had learned early that showing emotion around Council species was seen as a sign of weakness. "Excellent. Your efficiency continues to impress the Council. However, we have a situation that requires immediate attention." The alien's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Long-range sensors have detected movement in the void sector. We believe the Devourers have returned." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Devourers were a nightmare from ancient times. According to Council records, they had appeared thousands of years ago, consuming entire star systems before vanishing back into dark space. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They simply destroyed everything in their path. "How many ships?" Sarah asked. "Our estimates suggest a force of unprecedented size, perhaps 1,000 vessels or more. They are moving toward the Kepler colony cluster." Zarthek paused, letting the information sink in. "The Council has voted to mobilize all available forces. Your fleet will join the main battle group at coordinates I am transmitting now." Sarah looked at the data appearing on her screen. The coordinates would take them 3 days to reach, assuming they pushed their engines to maximum speed. The Kepler colonies were home to nearly 50 million beings from a dozen different species. "What about the other fleets?" Sarah asked. "The Hive Collective has 200 ships in that sector. The Centauri Defense Force has another 100. They will provide support and logistics. Your fleet will form the primary strike force." Zarthek's expression never changed. "Human tactical abilities and ship designs have proven most effective against unconventional threats." Sarah nodded, though something felt wrong about the arrangement. For 50 years, humans had been the ones sent to handle the most dangerous missions. They were always the first into battle and the last to retreat. The Council praised their courage and effectiveness, but Sarah had begun to wonder if there was another reason. "We'll be ready to depart within the hour," she said. "The Council appreciates Earth's continued dedication to galactic peace." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She walked to the navigation station where Commander James Park was already plotting their course. Park had been her executive officer for 10 years. He was one of the few people she trusted completely. "Something bothering you about this?" Park asked quietly. He knew her well enough to read her expressions. "The same thing that always bothers me," Sarah replied. "We're always the ones they send first," Park nodded. "Maybe it's because we're good at what we do, or maybe it's because they don't care if we don't come back." The thought had been growing in Sarah's mind for years. Humans made up less than 1% of the Council's total population, but they provided 30% of its military strength. Human ships were faster, more heavily armed, and more durable than most alien designs. Human crews were trained from childhood to think tactically and work as a team, but respect and trust were different things. Sarah had noticed how other species looked at humans during Council meetings. There was fear in their eyes and something else, something that looked like hatred. "Set course for the rendezvous point," Sarah ordered, "and send a message to all ships. We're going to war again. The human fleet moved through space like a school of predators. Each ship was painted in dark gray with Earth's blue and white symbol on the hull. They had names like Defiance, Retribution, Vengeance, and Fury. Names that spoke of humanity's history of conflict and survival. Sarah spent the 3-day journey reviewing everything they knew about the Devourers. The records were old and incomplete. The creatures seemed to exist only to consume and destroy. They had no apparent culture, no technology that could be understood, and no interest in communication. When the human fleet arrived at the rendezvous point, Sarah was surprised by what she saw. Instead of the massive combined force she had expected, there were only about 300 ships total. Most belonged to species known for their defensive capabilities rather than offensive power. "Where are the main battle fleets?" Sarah asked during the command briefing. The meeting was held aboard a Centauri vessel, with representatives from each participating species. "Protecting core worlds," answered Admiral Veltar of the Hive Collective. The insectoid creature's voice buzzed through the universal translator. "The Council determined that our most valuable systems must be defended." Sarah looked around the room. She saw representatives from the Aquari, known for their transport ships, the Ethereal Collective, who specialized in communication and sensor technology. The Terran Defense Force was the only purely military organization present. So we're expected to stop 1,000 Devourer ships with 300 vessels, most of which are support craft. "Human ingenuity has overcome greater odds," said Commander Kelevek of the Zakaran contingent. "Your species excels at impossible victories." The meeting continued for 2 hours, but Sarah learned nothing useful. The plan was simple. Engage the Devourers before they reached the Kepler colonies and hope that human firepower could make up for the numerical disadvantage. As she returned to her ship, Sarah found herself thinking about Earth. She had been born on Mars, but Earth was still home to 4 billion humans. It was a beautiful world, blue and green and full of life. The Council had promised to protect it in exchange for humanity's military service. But promises, Sarah had learned, were easy to make and easier to break. "All ships, prepare for battle," she announced over the fleet communication system. "We jump to the combat zone in 6 hours. Remember, we're not just fighting for the Council today. We're fighting for the right of every species to exist without fear." What Sarah didn't know was that this battle would be the last time she fought for the Council. Soon she would be fighting against them, and when that day came, the galaxy would learn what human vengeance truly meant. The battle against the Devourers had been raging for 18 hours. Admiral Sarah Chen watched from her command chair, as human ships fought desperately against an enemy that seemed to exist only to destroy. The Devourer vessels were unlike anything in the known galaxy. They were organic, shifting shapes that pulsed with dark energy and fired weapons that consumed matter itself. "7th Fleet is taking heavy casualties," Commander Park reported. His voice was steady, but Sarah could see the stress in his eyes. "The Vancouver is gone. The Beijing is venting atmosphere." Sarah nodded grimly. They had lost 12 ships already, with damage to almost every vessel in the fleet. The other Council forces had pulled back to defensive positions, leaving the humans to face the bulk of the enemy alone. "Admiral, incoming priority transmission from Council Command," Lieutenant Rodriguez announced. "Put it through." The image of Supreme Commander Zarthek appeared on the main screen. Behind him, Sarah could see other Council leaders, including Admiral Veltar of the Hive Collective and Fleet Commander Sinara of the Ethereal Coalition. "Admiral Chen, our tactical computers have identified a weakness in the Devourer formation," Zarthek said. "There appears to be a gap in their defenses at coordinates 347 Mark 82. Sarah looked at her tactical display. The coordinates were on the far side of the enemy fleet, away from the main battle. That position would require us to break off from our current engagement and circle around their entire force. Our analysis suggests this is the only way to reach their command vessel," another voice added. Sarah recognized Admiral Veltar's buzzing tone. "Your fleet's speed and firepower make you the ideal choice for this mission." Something felt wrong about the request. Sarah had been fighting aliens for 20 years, and she had developed good instincts about battle tactics. Moving the entire human fleet to those coordinates would leave them isolated and exposed. "What about support?" Sarah asked. "If we commit all our forces to this attack, we'll need backup. The Centauri Defense Force will provide covering fire," Zarthek assured her. And our reserve fleets are standing by to exploit any breakthrough you achieve. Sarah studied the tactical display more carefully. The proposed attack route would take her ships through an asteroid field and around a small moon. It was possible to reach the coordinates, but they would be out of communication with the main force for at least 30 minutes. "Admiral," Commander Park whispered, leaning close to her chair, "I don't like this. Something feels off." Sarah shared his concerns, but she also knew they were losing the battle. Human ships were tough, but they were outnumbered 3-1. If the Council's tactical analysis was correct, this might be their only chance to turn the tide. "All ships prepare to break off and follow the Defiance," Sarah announced. "We're going to hit their command vessel." The human fleet turned away from the main battle and accelerated toward the coordinates Zarthek had provided. Sarah watched as the other Council ships continued their defensive engagement, staying well away from the most dangerous Devourer vessels. As they moved through the asteroid field, Sarah felt her unease growing. The Devourers weren't pursuing them, which seemed strange. If the human fleet really was threatening their command ship, why weren't they responding? "We're approaching the coordinates," Park reported. "I'm not seeing any command vessel." Sarah stood up from her chair and walked to the tactical station. The display showed empty space ahead of them. No Devourer command ship, no gap in their defenses, just emptiness. "Rodriguez, try to raise Council command," Sarah ordered. "I'm getting nothing, Admiral. There's too much interference from the asteroid field." That was when Sarah noticed something that made her blood freeze. On the edge of her sensor range, she could see ships moving into position. They weren't Devourer vessels. They were Council ships. Zakaran battlecruisers, Hive collective carriers, and ethereal destroyers. They were surrounded. "All ships, emergency turn," Sarah shouted. "This is a trap!" But it was too late. The Council fleet opened fire from 3 directions simultaneously. The first salvo caught the human ships completely off guard. The UES Toronto exploded immediately, her reactor breached by Zakaran plasma cannons. The Montreal took hits to her engine section and began tumbling out of control. "They're targeting our engines and weapons," Park reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "They want to disable us, not destroy us." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. The Council wasn't trying to help them defeat the Devourers. They were trying to eliminate the human fleet. "Return fire," Sarah ordered. "All weapons, all targets." The human ships responded with decades of trained precision. Their cannons spoke with deadly accuracy, and Council vessels began taking damage. But the odds were hopeless. 50 human ships against 200 alien vessels. "Admiral, I'm picking up Council communications," Rodriguez reported. "They're not encrypted." "Put it on speaker." The bridge filled with alien voices speaking in their native languages, but the universal translator made their words clear. "Human. Ships are proving more resilient than expected," came Admiral Veltar's buzzing voice. "Increase firepower to their engine sections," another voice replied. "We need them immobilized for the next phase." "What about survivors?" a third alien asked. "No survivors." Zarthek's voice was cold and final. "The Devourer attack provides perfect cover. Humanity dies today." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. For 50 years, Earth had served the Council faithfully. Human beings had died protecting alien worlds, believing they were part of something noble and important. And all along, the Council had been planning to betray them. "All ships fighting retreat toward the asteroid field," Sarah commanded. "Use the rocks for cover." The human fleet began moving back the way they had come, but Council ships were already blocking their escape route. The UES Vancouver limped past Sarah's flagship. Her hull breached in a dozen places. "Admiral, the Retribution is requesting permission to ram the Zakaran flagship," came a voice over the communication system. "Negative," Sarah replied. "We're not throwing our lives away for their convenience." She watched as more human ships took damage. The Calgary was drifting, all power lost. The Winnipeg was fighting with only half her weapons operational. They were being systematically destroyed by aliens they had called allies. "Rodriguez, can you punch a message through to Earth?" Sarah asked. "Maybe if I route it through the communication satellites we placed in this system." "Do it. Send everything we've recorded. The Council's betrayal, their communications, all of it. Earth needs to know what really happened here." As Rodriguez worked frantically at his station, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She activated the ship's self-destruct sequence but set it for a 60-minute delay. "All ships prepare for emergency jump," she announced. Anyone who can still move, follow the Defiance. 8 human ships remained operational enough to jump to hyperspace. They fled the battle zone, leaving their dead behind in the asteroid field. Sarah looked back one last time at the Council fleet, now moving to rejoin the battle against the Devourers. The aliens would tell the galaxy that humanity had died fighting bravely against an ancient enemy. They would be remembered as heroes who gave their lives for galactic peace. But Sarah knew the truth, and soon Earth would know it too. As the survivors limped back toward human space, Sarah began planning something the Council would never expect. They thought they had eliminated humanity's military power. They were about to learn that humans had always been very good at keeping secrets. The real war was just beginning. Prime Minister Elena Vasquez stood in the emergency command center beneath the Swiss Alps, reading the message that had just arrived from Admiral Chen's surviving ships. The underground facility was one of many built during humanity's early years in the Council, designed to protect Earth's leadership in case of alien attack. No one had expected that attack to come from their supposed allies. "How long until the Council fleet reaches our system?" Elena asked General Morrison, head of Earth's Home Defense Force. 18 hours, the general replied. "They're moving fast and broadcasting friendship signals. To anyone monitoring, it looks like they're coming to protect us from the Devourers." Elena looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leadership. These were people who had dedicated their lives to building a peaceful relationship with the galaxy. Now they were preparing for war against the very species they had tried so hard to befriend. "What's our current defensive capability?" Elena asked. "Officially, 12 patrol ships and the orbital defense platforms," General Morrison answered. "That's what the Council thinks we have." Elena nodded. "And unofficially?" For the first time in hours, General Morrison smiled. "That's a very different number." 20 minutes later, Elena was riding in an elevator that descended nearly 2 kilometers into the Earth's crust. The facility she was visiting didn't exist on any official records. As far as the Council knew, this area contained nothing but old mining tunnels. The elevator doors opened to reveal something that would have shocked every alien in the galaxy. Stretching out before them was a massive underground shipyard, its ceiling lost in shadows above. Dozens of warships sat in various stages of construction, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in the official Earth Defense Force. "Welcome to Project Darkstar," General Morrison said. "We've been building this fleet for 30 years. Elena walked along the observation deck, looking down at the ships below. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, sleek hulls painted in deep black, bristling with weapons that looked nothing like standard human designs. "The Council required us to share all our military technology," General Morrison explained. "But they never asked about our research programs. Every alien weapon system, every defensive technology, every tactical innovation we've encountered in 5 decades of service. We've studied it all and built countermeasures." Elena stopped in front of a display showing technical specifications. The numbers were impressive. These ships were faster than anything the Council had, with armor that could withstand weapons that would destroy traditional human vessels. "How many?" Elena asked. 200 completed vessels, with another 50 that can be operational within 72 hours, Morrison replied. "Each ship is crewed by personnel officially listed as working in asteroid mining or deep space research." Elena felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Humanity had spent 30 years preparing for this day, hoping it would never come. They had pretended to be loyal members of the galactic community while secretly building the tools of their own independence. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Admiral Chen's message mentioned that the Council specifically targeted our engine and weapon systems during the ambush. They wanted our ships disabled, not destroyed. They planned to capture our technology," Elena realized. "Exactly. But they don't know about the real innovations. Every ship in our official fleet had hidden self-destruct charges. If they had captured any of our vessels intact, they would have found standard human technology. Nothing that would give away our true capabilities." Elena thought about the implications. The Council believed they had eliminated humanity's military power and captured examples of their best technology. They would be expecting Earth to surrender without a fight, grateful for the protection the aliens would provide. "What about Admiral Chen's surviving ships?" Elena asked. "They're approaching the asteroid belt now. Admiral Morrison's home defense fleet will rendezvous with them in 6 hours." General Morrison paused. The Admiral shares your last name, but that's just coincidence. James Morrison is my younger brother. Elena nodded. She had heard of Admiral Morrison, though they had never met. He was known for his unconventional tactics and his willingness to take risks that other commanders wouldn't consider. Send a message to both admirals, Elena ordered. Tell them the Terra Protocol is now active. They have full authorization to use any means necessary to defend Earth. As they returned to the surface, Elena's assistant handed her another report. Council forces were already broadcasting messages to Earth, expressing their sorrow over humanity's losses in the battle against the Devourers. They promised to provide protection and guidance during this difficult time. The hypocrisy was almost impressive. Elena returned to the command center to find Admiral Chen's face on the main communication screen. The woman looked tired and angry, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Prime Minister, I assume you've received our full report on the Council's betrayal. We have, Elena replied, and we're preparing our response. How many ships do you have operational? 8 vessels with varying degrees of damage. The Defiance is at 60% capability, but she'll fight. Understood. You're to rendezvous with Admiral Morrison's fleet and await further orders. Admiral Chen nodded. Ma'am, I need you to know that they murdered thousands of our people in cold blood. They planned this from the beginning. I know, Elena said quietly. And they're going to pay for it. The Council fleet entered Earth's solar system exactly 18 hours later, just as General Morrison had predicted. They came broadcasting messages of sympathy and protection, their ships arranged in a formation designed to look peaceful and defensive. They never saw the first wave of attacks coming. The Luna shipyards had been disguised as mining operations for 3 decades. When they opened their hidden bays, 200 warships emerged like predators from their lairs. The Council fleet found themselves surrounded by vessels that shouldn't have existed, carrying weapons that violated half the galactic warfare conventions. The first salvo caught the alien ships completely off guard. Human weapons had been designed specifically to counter Council defenses, plasma cannons that burned through Zakharan shields, kinetic accelerators that punched through Hive collective armor, and electronic warfare systems that turned ethereal sensor technology against itself. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, came a voice broadcast on all frequencies. To the Council fleet currently violating Earth's sovereign space, you have 60 seconds to surrender or withdraw. This is your only warning. The response came from Supreme Commander Zarthek himself. Admiral Chen, you have been deceived by false information. We are here to protect Earth from— Your 60 seconds are up, Admiral Chen interrupted. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The Council fleet had been designed to fight the type of enemy they understood. Other Council species with similar technology and tactics. They had never faced an enemy that had spent 30 years studying their weaknesses and building weapons, specifically designed to exploit them. Human ships moved through the alien formation like sharks through a school of fish. Council vessels that had seemed mighty and impressive found themselves helpless against weapons they couldn't understand and tactics they had never encountered. Within 2 hours, the entire Council fleet was either destroyed or fleeing toward the edge of the solar system. Those few ships that escaped carried a message that would terrify the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the naive species that had joined the Council 50 years ago. They had become something far more dangerous. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, looking out at the wreckage of the alien fleet. Admiral Chen stood beside her, both women silent as they contemplated what had just happened. What now? Admiral Chen asked. Elena's voice was cold as space itself when she answered. Now we show them what happens when you betray humanity. The Council wanted a war. They're going to get one. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display in the UES Defiance's war room, studying the tactical map of Council space. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Sol, and the human fleet had been busy. Red markers showed the locations of successful attacks, while yellow indicators marked worlds that had surrendered without fighting. The results were impressive and terrifying. Centauri Prime fell yesterday, Admiral Morrison reported. He was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. Their defense fleet lasted exactly 47 minutes. Sarah nodded without emotion. The Centauri had been among the first to welcome humanity into the Council, and among the first to betray them. Their homeworld was now under human occupation. Its government dissolved and its military disbanded. Casualties? Sarah asked. Minimal on our side. The Centauri surrendered when they realized their shields couldn't stop our kinetic bombardment systems. Morrison paused. They're asking for terms. Same terms we've offered everyone else, Sarah replied. Complete surrender, dissolution of their military forces, and full cooperation with the new administration. The other officers in the room remained silent. They had all served in the old Council fleet, fighting alongside aliens they thought were allies. Now they were conquering those same species with ruthless efficiency. Captain Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Sarah's communications officer, looked up from her data pad. The Hive Collective is requesting a meeting. They want to discuss a ceasefire. Sarah almost smiled. Tell them they can meet with us at the ruins of their military headquarters on Kepler Station. We'll discuss their surrender, not a ceasefire. The transformation of humanity's military had been remarkable. The ships that emerged from hidden bases throughout the solar system were technological marvels, but it was the crews that made them truly deadly. Every human in the fleet had grown up hearing stories about the Council's benevolence. When they learned the truth about the betrayal, their anger had crystallized into something cold and unforgiving. Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth Command, Lieutenant Park announced from the communication station. Prime Minister Vasquez appeared on the main screen. Behind her, Sarah could see the rebuilt command center on Luna, now serving as headquarters for humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Admiral Chen, I hope your mission continues to proceed smoothly. Better than expected, ma'am, Sarah replied. Most Council species are surrendering before we engage them. Word is spreading about what happened to the ones who chose to fight. The Ethereal Collective had made that mistake. Their homeworld had possessed orbital defense platforms that they believed could stop any attack. Human ships had demonstrated the futility of that belief by reducing the platforms to molten metal in less than an hour. The planet's surrender had followed immediately. What's the status of the liberation operations? Vasquez asked. Sarah's expression softened slightly. We've freed over 2 billion sentient beings from Council slave worlds. Most of them didn't even know they were slaves until we arrived. This had been one of the most shocking discoveries of the war. The Council had presented itself as a peaceful federation of equals, but the reality was very different. Dozens of species had been kept in various forms of bondage, their labor and resources feeding the wealthier Council worlds. The Draconi were a perfect example. For 300 years they had been told they were junior partners in the Council, responsible for mining operations in dangerous asteroid fields. In reality, they were slaves working in conditions that killed thousands every year. When human forces liberated their worlds, the Draconi had wept with gratitude. The political situation is becoming more complex, Vasquez continued. Some of the liberated species want to join our fight against the Council. Others just want to be left alone. Both are acceptable, Sarah replied. We're not building an empire. We're dismantling one. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Humanity had entered the galaxy seeking friendship and cooperation. Instead, they had become the most powerful military force in known space, toppling governments and reshaping the political order. But they were doing it to prevent the kind of betrayal they had suffered from ever happening again. There's something else, Vasquez said, her tone becoming more serious. Our intelligence networks have uncovered evidence of something called the Final Protocol. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of protocol? We're not sure yet. It appears to be some kind of contingency plan the Council leadership developed in case they ever lost control of the galaxy. Our analysts are working to decode the details. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The war had been going well, perhaps too well. Council forces had proven incapable of stopping human advances, and their political structure was collapsing under the pressure of military defeats. But Sarah had learned not to underestimate aliens who were desperate. Cornered enemies were often the most dangerous. All ships, prepare for acceleration, Sarah announced. We're moving on the Zakaran home system. Zakara Prime was the crown jewel of Council space, a world that had never known the touch of war. Its orbital shipyards had produced Council vessels for centuries, and its government complexes housed the bureaucracy that administered the galaxy's largest political entity. It was also the most heavily defended world in known space. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zakaran system to find exactly what they had expected. Thousands of ships filled the space around the planet, representing the combined military might of a dozen species. Orbital fortresses bristled with weapons, and planetary shields shimmered like soap bubbles around the world below. "They're transmitting," Lieutenant Park reported. "Let's hear it." Supreme Commander Zarthek's image appeared on screen. The reptilian alien looked older and more tired than Sarah remembered, but his yellow eyes still burned with hatred. "Admiral Chen. So the primitive species finally reveals its true nature. We learned from the best teachers," Sarah replied calmly. "You showed us that honor and loyalty are weaknesses. Thank you for the lesson. You think your stolen technology makes you superior. We built this civilization while your species was still learning to make fire." Sarah studied the tactical display showing the enemy formations. Even with all their advantages, this would be the hardest battle yet. The Council had finally assembled enough forces to present a real challenge. "Maybe," Sarah said. "But you made one critical mistake. You thought we would be grateful enough to die quietly." The battle for Zakara Prime lasted 6 hours and changed the course of galactic history. Human weapons technology proved superior, but Council forces fought with the desperation of beings who knew they were facing extinction. Space filled with the wreckage of both fleets as ships died in brilliant explosions. The orbital fortresses fell one by one to human bombardment, their massive guns silenced forever. But the humans paid a price. They lost 15 ships, including some of their most advanced vessels. In the end, it was human boarding parties that decided the battle. Soldiers in powered armor stormed the remaining Council ships, fighting deck by deck through corridors designed for different species. The aliens had superior numbers, but humans had something more valuable: the absolute certainty that they were fighting for their survival. When the last Council ship surrendered, Sarah stood on her bridge looking down at Zakara Prime. The planet's shields had failed, leaving it defenseless beneath the guns of the human fleet. "They're requesting terms," Admiral Morrison reported. Sarah thought about all the human crews who had died believing they were serving a noble cause. She remembered the faces of the officers who had been murdered in the asteroid field, betrayed by beings they had trusted. "No terms," she said quietly. "They wanted to exterminate us. Instead, they've exterminated themselves." The bombardment of Zakara Prime's government centers lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Council as a political entity ceased to exist. Some species fled to distant galaxies, others surrendered completely, and a few became genuine allies of the Human Federation that was slowly taking shape. Sarah Chen had entered this war as a military officer serving the Terran Defense Force. She was ending it as the de facto ruler of the galaxy's most powerful civilization. It wasn't a role she had wanted, but it was one she would fulfill. The galaxy had betrayed humanity once. It would never get the chance to do so again. 1 year after the fall of Zakara Prime, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in what had once been the Council's Grand Assembly Hall. The massive chamber had been designed to hold representatives from 200 species, with floating platforms arranged in complex patterns that spoke of galactic unity and cooperation. Now it served as the headquarters of the Terran Administrative Authority. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Humanity had joined the Council seeking peace and friendship. Instead, they had become the galaxy's new rulers, governing through a combination of military might and the grudging respect of species who had learned what happened to those who opposed them. "The quarterly reports are in," announced Director Park, Sarah's former executive officer who now managed civilian affairs for a dozen star systems. "Agricultural output is up 18%, and refugee resettlement is ahead of schedule." Sarah nodded as she reviewed the data on her personal display. The numbers told a story of gradual recovery from the chaos that had followed the Council's collapse. Species that had been kept as slaves were learning to govern themselves. Worlds that had been strip-mined for the benefit of Council elites were being restored. It was slow work, but it was working. "What about the resistance movements?" Sarah asked. 3 cells were eliminated this month, Park replied. Most of them were Zakaran loyalists trying to sabotage shipping routes. Our intelligence networks are getting better at identifying threats before they become serious problems. Sarah walked to the massive viewing window that overlooked what had once been Zakara Prime's capital city. The skyline was different now. Human engineering teams had rebuilt the areas destroyed in the final bombardment. but the new structures were simpler and more functional. The elaborate spires and floating platforms that had demonstrated Council wealth and power were gone forever. "Any word from the Deep Space Reconnaissance Fleet?" Sarah asked. "Admiral Morrison reports no sign of the Devourer forces," Park answered. "Whatever happened to them after the battle in Council space, they haven't been seen since." That was another mystery that kept Sarah awake at night. The Devourers had vanished just as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving behind no trace except the devastated worlds they had consumed. Some human scientists theorized that they had been artificial constructs created by an unknown enemy. Others believed they were a natural phenomenon, like a cosmic storm that came and went according to patterns too vast for mortal minds to understand. Sarah preferred a third theory. The Devourers had been exactly what they appeared to be, and humanity had been very lucky that the Council's betrayal had prevented a larger confrontation. "There's something else," Park said, his tone becoming more serious. "Our intelligence teams have finally decoded the Council's final protocol." Sarah turned away from the window. They had been working on this puzzle for months, trying to understand what the former Council leadership had planned as their ultimate contingency. What did they find? Park activated a holographic display that showed a complex star chart. Dozens of systems were marked in red with connection lines showing some kind of network. "It's a weapon," Park explained. "The Council built a chain of artificial black holes throughout the galaxy, connected by subspace manipulation technology. If activated, the network would have created a cascade effect that destroyed every star system within 50,000 light-years." Sarah stared at the display in horror. "Including Earth?" "Including Earth. The protocol was designed to deny the galaxy to any species that proved capable of overthrowing Council authority. The implications were staggering. If humanity's war had lasted longer, or if the Council leadership had felt more threatened, they might have chosen to destroy the entire galaxy, rather than allow someone else to control it. "Where are the activation controls?" Sarah asked. "That's the interesting part. They were located in a facility on Zakara Prime, about 3 kilometers from where we're standing right now." Sarah looked out the window again, imagining the hidden complex buried beneath the rebuilt city. Somewhere down there, the Council had kept the power to commit genocide on a galactic scale. "I want that facility secured and the weapon systems permanently disabled," Sarah ordered. "And I want a full investigation into whether any other species knew about this." As Park left to carry out her orders, Sarah remained alone in the vast chamber. She thought about the path that had brought humanity to this point. They had started as naive newcomers seeking acceptance in a larger community. They had become the galaxy's most feared military power through necessity and betrayal. But what would they become next? The door to the chamber opened and Prime Minister Vasquez entered. The older woman looked tired but determined, carrying the weight of decisions that affected billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. "The Centauri delegation is here for their scheduled meeting," Vasquez announced. "How are they adjusting to the new order?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected. Their new government is actually more popular than the old Council-appointed administrators. It turns out that being governed by your own species instead of distant aliens is something most people appreciate." Sarah nodded. That had been the pattern throughout former Council space. Species that had been genuine partners in the old system were adapting well to independence. Those that had been subject peoples were embracing freedom with enthusiasm. It was only the former Council elites who continued to resist. "There's been another development," Vasquez continued. "We've received a long-range transmission from beyond the galactic rim. It appears to be from a human colony ship." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Impossible. All the colony ships were accounted for decades ago. Apparently not. This ship left Earth during the early years of the Council period, heading for the Andromeda galaxy. They've been traveling for 40 years. The implications were enormous. Somewhere in the void between galaxies, a ship full of humans had been traveling at sublight speeds, completely unaware of everything that had happened. They knew nothing about the Council's betrayal, humanity's war of retribution, or the new galactic order. "What's their estimated arrival time in Andromeda?" Sarah asked. "Another 20 years, assuming their life support systems continue to function." Sarah thought about those colonists, sleeping in cryogenic pods as they traveled toward a distant galaxy. They had left Earth as citizens of a peaceful interstellar community. If they ever returned, They would find their species ruling an empire built on the ashes of their former allies. Keep monitoring their transmissions, Sarah decided, and start preparing a full briefing package. They have a right to know what happened. As evening fell over the former council capital, Sarah stood alone on the observation deck of her personal quarters. The city below was quiet, its lights reflecting off the atmospheric processors that kept the air breathable for human physiology. In the distance, she could see the construction sites where new settlements were being built for the various species that had chosen to remain on Zakara Prime. Humans, Dracani, Aquari, and even some reformed Centauri were working together to build something better than what had come before. It wasn't the future any of them had planned, but it was the future they had earned. Sarah's personal communicator chimed, and Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the small screen. "Sarah, we've got a situation developing in the Kepler sector. Some of the Hive Collective remnants are trying to re-establish their old government." "How many ships?" Sarah asked. "Maybe 30 vessels, mostly converted cargo haulers. Nothing we can't handle, but they're threatening the civilian populations on 3 worlds." Sarah sighed. It seemed there was always someone who hadn't learned the lesson yet. "Take a squadron and remind them why the old government fell. Try to minimize civilian casualties, but make sure they understand that the council is dead and it's staying dead." "Understood. Morrison out." Sarah looked up at the stars, thinking about all the worlds that now looked to Earth for leadership and protection. It was a responsibility she had never wanted, but one she couldn't abandon. The galaxy had betrayed humanity once, and in doing so, they had created the very thing they had feared. Humans were no longer the grateful junior partners they had been. They were the dominant species in the galaxy, and they intended to remain that way. But unlike the Council, humanity ruled through strength rather than deception. They protected the weak instead of exploiting them, and they had learned from history's mistakes. The price of betrayal, Sarah reflected, was not just the fall of the betrayer. It was the rise of something new and unforgiving in their place. The Council had sown the wind and reaped the whirlwind. Now the galaxy belonged to humanity, and humanity would never again trust anyone enough to be betrayed. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she thought about the motto that had been carved into the wall of every human military installation. "Remember the betrayal." It served as both a warning to potential enemies and a reminder to humanity itself. They had learned the hardest lesson the universe could teach. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. But strength? Strength was eternal.